welcome back to the Anna-losophy podcast. Today we're talking about Tuesdays with Morrie. And what makes this story very special is that it's actually a true story. Mitch Albom really was a student of Morrie Schwartz, and the conversations in the book are based on the time they actually spent together before Morrie's death. I think this is definitely one of those stories that seems pretty simple when you first hear about it. In essence, a student reconnects with one of his old professors, they meet every Tuesday, and they talk about life. But the reason those conversations become so meaningful is because Morrie knows that he doesn't have much time left. Morrie Schwartz was Mitch Albom's sociology professor at Brandeis University, and years after Mitch graduates, the two unfortunately lose touch. Mitch, on the one hand, becomes very busy with his career and his life. On the other, Morrie becomes seriously ill. When Mitch eventually sees Morrie on television and learns that he is dying, he decides to visit him. That visit turns into a series of Tuesday meetings, where Morrie talks openly about love, family, work, aging, death, and what he thinks makes a life worth living. I've personally read the book and watched the movie, and I wanted to talk about a mix of both, because the story gives us so many philosophical questions. Morrie's situation makes the conversations about life much more serious, because he knows that his time is limited. That brings up the question I want to focus on throughout this episode. If we knew exactly how much time we had left, would we live our lives any differently? So I'll start with the story of Mitch and Morrie and explain how their relationship changes after they reconnect. Then we'll get into the philosophy behind Morrie's ideas about happiness, success, relationships, aging, and death. So with that being said, let's talk about Tuesdays with Morrie. Tuesdays with Morrie is a true story about Mitch Albom and his former sociology professor, Morrie Schwartz. Mitch first meets Morrie when he's a student at Brandeis University, where Morrie becomes one of the professors he feels closest to. After Mitch graduates, however, they slowly lose contact. Mitch becomes focused on his career as a sports journalist, getting busier and busier with work and the life he has built for himself. Years later, Mitch sees Morrie being interviewed on television and discovers that his old professor has been diagnosed with ALS, a serious disease that gradually takes away his ability to move and care for himself. Mitch decides to visit him, expecting it to be a short reunion. Instead, the two begin meeting every Tuesday. These meetings become almost like a final class, with Morrie as the teacher and Mitch as the student again, except this time the subject is life itself. As Morrie's illness gets worse, the two talk about the things that matter most to him. They discuss love, family, money, work, aging, forgiveness, relationships, happiness, and death. Morrie believes that society often teaches people to measure their lives through money, success, careers, and status, even though those things can't give a person the same kind of happiness that comes from having meaningful relationships and caring about other people. Mitch begins to recognize how much of his own life has become focused on work and achievement, and he starts questioning whether he's been spending his time on the things he actually values. One of the most important parts of their conversations is Morrie's attitude toward death. Morrie is fully aware that he is dying, and he chooses to talk about it openly rather than completely avoid the subject. He explains that knowing his life is ending has made him think a lot more carefully about how he spends the time he has left. His illness changes pretty much everything about his daily life, but nonetheless, he continues trying to connect with people, share everything he has learned, and find meaning in the time he has left. The relationship between Mitch and Morrie also changes as the meetings continue. Mitch originally comes back because he feels genuinely worried and concerned about his old professor, but he eventually realizes that he needs Morrie's guidance just as much as he did when he was a student. This is when Mitch begins opening up about his own life and the things that have been bothering him. Morrie listens to him, challenges some of the beliefs Mitch has developed, and encourages him to think more carefully about what he wants his life to mean. As Morrie's condition becomes more serious, Mitch continues returning every Tuesday. Their conversations become more personal, and Mitch becomes increasingly aware that these meetings can't continue forever. Eventually, Morrie becomes too weak to continue in the same way, and he passes away surrounded by the people who love him. Mitch is left with a memory of all of their Tuesdays together, as well as the lessons Morrie taught him. The story ends with Mitch realizing that Morrie's death doesn't erase the relationship they built. The things Morrie taught him continue to affect the way he thinks about his own career, his relationships, and his own life. Tuesdays with Morrie is ultimately the story of a student returning to his old teacher, and through those final conversations, learning how to think differently about what makes a life meaningful. So that being said, let's move on to the philosophical question of today's episode. If we knew exactly how much time we had left, would we live life any differently? Morrie's situation makes this question especially powerful because he knows that his life is coming to an end. Of course, he doesn't know every exact moment he has left, but he understands that his time is limited, and that knowledge changes the way he looks at ordinary life. Mitch, meanwhile, has been living as though he has plenty of time. He is busy with his career and has allowed years to pass without seeing Morrie. When they reconnect, Mitch is suddenly faced with something he had been able to ignore before. Time is always passing, whether we pay attention to it or not. This connects closely to the Roman philosopher Seneca, who lived from around 4 BCE to 65 CE. One of his most famous philosophical works is On the Shortness of Life, and his central argument is actually more complicated than simply saying that life is short. Seneca argues that human beings often waste the time they already have, and then complain that they weren't given enough. He writes about people who spend their lives being busy with work, money, status, other people's opinions, and endless responsibilities, only to realize much later that they haven't really lived according to their own priorities. This idea fits Mitch almost perfectly. At the beginning of the story, Mitch isn't necessarily doing anything obviously terrible. He works hard, he has a career, and is trying his best to build a successful life. The problem is that being busy has gradually become his normal way of living. He has less time for the people he cares and loves, and his relationship with Morrie has almost disappeared. Seneca would ask us to look beyond whether Mitch is productive or not, and ask a more important question. Productive toward what? If all of Mitch's time is being spent achieving things, but he isn't giving enough time to the relationships and values that actually matter to him, then simply having a busy life doesn't mean he is using his life well or living his life to the fullest. And this is where Seneca's philosophy becomes very interesting. Seneca says that time is the one thing that human beings can't recover. If you lose money, for example, you might earn it again, and if you lose a possession, you might find it or you might replace it. Time works differently. Once an hour has passed, there is no way to obtain that exact hour again. This makes time different from almost every other resource we have. We often treat it casually precisely because we can't see it, it's intangible. Morrie begins to experience this in an extreme way. As his illness progresses, things that most people do automatically become very, very difficult or impossible for him. His awareness of his limited time becomes impossible for him to ignore because it pretty much affects his way of doing everyday tasks. But instead of spending his remaining time trying to accomplish everything, Morrie becomes a lot more focused on the people and conversations that give his life meaning. His Tuesdays with Mitch really matter to him because he has chosen to spend part of his limited time teaching, listening, remembering, and connecting. Seneca's argument helps explain why these conversations are so important. The value of time isn't determined simply by how much of it we have. It depends on what or who we give it to. Someone could live for, let's say, 85 years and spend most of that time chasing things they never really cared about. Someone else could have far less time and use it to build meaningful relationships and live according to their values. From Seneca's perspective, the second person may have understood the value of time more clearly. This also changes how we think about Morrie's illness. So his physical condition is taking away parts of his independence, but at least Morrie still has some control over how he uses the time that remains. He chooses to continue teaching Mitch. He chooses to talk about a bunch of difficult subjects. He chooses to spend time with the people he loves. Of course, his circumstances are definitely becoming difficult, but his response to those circumstances still matter. Mitch's relationship with Morrie, therefore, becomes a kind of lesson in attention. Before reconnecting with Morrie, Mitch has been moving pretty quickly through his life. The Tuesday meetings force him to slow down and actually listen. So, as of right now, Mitch isn't thinking about his next piece or his next assignment or the next thing that he needs to accomplish. He is sitting down with Morrie and having a conversation that obviously has no financial or professional reward. Yet those conversations end up being some of the most valuable experiences of Mitch's life. This is where Seneca's philosophy can become relevant to everyday life. We often say that we don't have enough time to do things, but sometimes the problem is that our time is already being consumed by things we have never stopped to question. A person, for example, with the rise of social media and AI, for example, can spend so many hours scrolling through a phone, working on something they don't care about, worrying about what other people think, or constantly planning what they'll do next. Of course, none of those activities automatically make life meaningless, but Seneca would want us to ask whether we're choosing how our time is being spent, or simply allowing our lives to be filled for us. So is it controlling us? Morrie does something that most of us rarely have the chance to do in the first place. He is forced to really explore and examine that question head on. His illness makes him aware that there is an ending for him, but the philosophical question isn't limited to the people who are seriously ill. Everyone has a limited amount of time, no matter how old you are, and the difference is that most of us don't know where the limit is, but Morrie does. And that creates the most interesting part of the question. Would knowing the exact amount of time we have left actually make us better at living? Maybe. If someone were told they had 1 year left, they might make more time for their family, repair an old friendship, stop working a job they hate if that's applicable for them, or pursue something they've always wanted to do. But there is always another possibility. They might become so obsessed with making every single second meaningful that they would feel guilty whenever they rested or did something normal. Morrie's approach avoids that extreme. Morrie didn't treat every remaining moment as though something must be productive or produce an achievement. He finds meaning in the daily things like conversation, affection, memory, and simply being with other people and remembering who they are. His understanding of time is therefore less about doing more and more about valuing what you are already doing. So instead of trying to gain more friends, although that's always great, Morrie tries to spend a lot of time with his family and strengthen as well as reinforce the relationships that he already has with other people. So Seneca's philosophy ultimately gives us a way to understand Mitch's transformation and character development. Although Morrie doesn't suddenly give Mitch more years to live, he does change Mitch's understanding of the years Mitch already has. The Tuesdays become valuable because Mitch begins to recognize something he had previously overlooked. Time was never something he could afford to waste in the first place. So maybe that's the part of Morrie's lessons that really apply to us. Because as human beings, we usually wait for something to remind us that life is short, as though we need some really big event before we take our time seriously. But Morrie receives that reminder in the most direct way possible. Mitch, even though he doesn't have the predetermined amount of time left for him, receives it through their friendship and his relationship with Morrie. But the rest of us already have the information we need. We know our time is limited. We simply don't know how much of it we have. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this week's episode of the Anna-losophy podcast. As always, I'm always appreciative of your guys' support, so thank you so much. As always, read, be curious, and have a great one. Bye!